That brings up a good point. Like, give us a general idea of, because you watch closing arguments, give us a general idea of what the defense team tried to leave the jury with before, obviously, the jury had to get in these complicated questions of the law and individual transactions. What was their general pitch to the jury of why either the NRA shouldn't be found liable or why these individual defendants shouldn't be found liable for this stuff? What was their closing argument?
Yeah, well, this case can be very hard to sum up, right? As you might notice from how I'm kind of caveating everything or going to different spots here or there, because, you know, you're trying to summarize a 6-week case, and even closing arguments themselves, that was 8 hours of closing arguments. And you had, in the defense case, like you're asking about here, you got 4 different lawyers getting up to give 4 different defenses, really. There's themes. They all claim that everybody was acting in good faith because that's key to the law, like whether or not you might make mistakes, right? But mistakes are expected to happen at some point, right? Especially in a large organization, you're going to have somebody making mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes. They're human, right? So the law allows for this to some degree. And one of the key things is whether or not you were acting in good faith. And so that's one major theme to the defense. All 4 defendants argued that they only ever acted in good faith. Obviously, the AG argued the opposite, that either these defendants, the individual defendants, were knowingly doing this stuff, like the private jet travel, or especially the way Wayne would book that, which was through a travel agent, where he would often tell her not to include certain stops if he went to pick up his niece, right, as part of the trip. That would she would be told not to include that in the billing, or, you know, written out. You know, Woody Phillips had made arrangements, although some of this doesn't make it into court, is another hard thing too, because not everything that we know publicly was introduced in this case. For instance, Woody Phillips, there's an audio recording that came out during the trial that includes him speaking with Ackerman McQueen, the NRA's former top contractor, who's a big player in this whole corruption scandal. He's talking to executives from that company about how they're going to have Ackerman issue a credit card to Tyler Schropp, who was the head of, I believe, development at the NRA at the time, so that he could make purchases, sort of potentially embarrassing purchases, things like private jet travel, luxury hotels, on the Ackerman card. And then Ackerman would bill that back to the NRA, so that the NRA wouldn't have to necessarily disclose that they were making these purchases. It would just be bundled up into the bill that Ackerman was sending over, which is how a lot of these sort of things happen. That's what the suits, people talk about the suits, right? That was how that was arranged. Ackerman paid for those suits. In fact, the NRA never reimbursed them for that. Although that was because when that happened, the reimbursement payments didn't go through, because that's when the split occurred. This was the relationship they had for decades. This was how they arranged. That tape is from several decades ago, of them arranging this sort of graft operation. But that didn't make it into court. So Woody Phillips didn't have to answer for that stuff. So a lot of his, he had to answer for a lot of other things that did make it into court, like related party transactions. He got a big contract once he left the NRA. I think this is the main part of the claims of how he enriched himself from NRA, was that he got this post-employment contract that was worth $30,000 a month plus $3,500 of for an office allowance, where there were no terms for what he would actually have to do in return. And I don't think there was any evidence presented that he did anything during the time that was in effect. It was a consulting agreement. So the idea was that he was available to give his guidance to the next CFO that replaced him. But I don't think there was any evidence he ever did that. Now, and also that contract basically got canceled almost immediately. I think he made like a couple $100,000, or maybe even less than that. I think he might have made $100,000 off of that contract. But obviously, that's at issue. It's a related party transaction, and it's not clear that they were getting value for it, which is a big issue. So there's just so much to cover. But good faith was a huge theme. You had Wayne LaPierre's lawyer focus primarily on the political aspect of this case. So, as we've talked about at length, I think on the show and in our pieces, one of the big aspects of this case is that Letitia James, the Attorney General, who's a Democrat, ran on investigating and going after the NRA. She called them a terrorist organization when she was running for AG. We talked about this last week with Professor Fishman and why this, the NRA has presented this as a defense. They tried to use this to get the case thrown out, right? Her comments, and it didn't work. That was rejected by the judge in the case and also on appeal. So, the reason was that the idea that, her comments didn't have an effect on the nature of the charges in the case, and that there was evidence underpinning the stuff that she was going after them for that wasn't connected to her political bias. But obviously, that still sort of casts a lot of doubt on this prosecution, or it casts it in a certain light, right, for a lot of people.
Right.
And so LaPierre's lawyer tried to focus on that in his defense, on this idea that Letitia James wanted to destroy the NRA. And so the way to do that was to destroy Wayne LaPierre. That's a direct line from his closing. And he tried to defend some of the more extravagant expenses that he made as being efforts to recruit high dollar donors and celebrities to be the face of the NRA. And so, that was kind of Wayne's closing argument. You had Woody Phillips, his lawyer claimed that he never did anything to harm the NRA. Another common defense you saw among both the NRA and some of the individual defendants like Woody and LaPierre was that, they obviously weren't destroying this organization. It wasn't a total scam operation. The NRA grew tremendously during their tenure there. It became a lot more powerful. It gained a lot of members. It brought in a lot more money. So, whatever they were doing, you could question the management style or whether some of these expenses are worth what they were getting in return. But you can't question that they were successful in growing this organization and fulfilling its mission by advocating for gun rights successfully.